What is up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Collection Commentary. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this Custom Knife Factory Tashi Barucha collaboration muscle that has some aftermarket customization done to it. First things first, let's go ahead and line this thing up next to the Paramilitary 2. This knife is the biggest knife I've ever had, the biggest folder I've ever had, I'm pretty sure. And you can see here that in just about every dimension, it completely dwarfs the Paramilitary 2. It's super tall, it's super long. I'm pretty sure that in the last video I checked, and it's actually longer than my cutting board, top to bottom. So super, super huge. And then you can't see it from this perspective, but I can see it. I'm going to show you guys right now. The thickness is real. Let's see if I can get these right up next to each other. So you can see that the muscle is maybe 50%, 75% thicker than the PM2. It's pretty impressive. Even the blade stock on this is just about as thick as both PM2 scales if they were going to be put directly next to one another. So this thing is a genuine monster of a knife. There's no doubt about that. For this one, guys, I don't really have like a set of features and flaws. I just want to talk about a couple things on this knife. There isn't too much to go on about with this one. So the interesting thing here, I'll kind of just actually start with the story time, which is that I purchased this knife definitely over retail. I was told that this was a rare factory anodization, and having never seen one that came anode from the factory and having it been purple, I completely jumped at the opportunity to pull the trigger on this knife. And then come to find out that actually was not accurate. So seems that the previous owner of the knife, or the owner before him, was lied to by an eBay seller. So that's a bit of a forewarning to any of you out there who are looking to purchase a fancy knife off eBay. Please always be skeptical. But an eBay seller did lie about the work. And so it was purchased, and then it was purchased again, and then it was purchased by me. So what's actually happened here is that this purple bronze, or as Tri-City Customs calls it, bronzerple. The anodization was done by an Instagram user who I will link to down below. And then the person who bought the knife off of the Instagram user is actually the one who did the satin flats. So I'll give you guys a quick look here. I think the work is really well done. I think it's still an impressive knife. And it looks super cool. And so, you know, it sucks that it wasn't factory, but the aftermarket work was definitely done to a very high degree of quality. And I'm super appreciative of that. One thing that I think is really cool about this knife with the aesthetics is all of the different mill patterns. So we'll just take a quick look. You start here, you have this kind of diamond plate pattern, which is pretty neat. And then that's followed up by this honeycomb pattern here. And then you have these horizontal dashes. And then you have these diagonal lines. And so it's pretty cool just having these four kind of different patterns going on in each section of the knife. I like that. I like that it spices things up, makes it a little bit unique. And I thought that was a really cool feature of the knife. Now that's of course true on all of the muscles. They all exist that way. But the fact that this was anodized and then had the silver kind of brought back out through the anodization, I think it really makes it pop. The trouble that I have with the factory version of this knife is that the whole thing is like plain tie, and they took the time to do all of this like really detailed, intricate millwork, and then you can't see it like basically at all. So that sucks, and I really think that this knife was done a huge amount of justice by being anodized and then having the flats and the tips of everything kind of polished away to a satin finish. So I'm super appreciative of that kind of aftermarket aesthetic going on with this knife, and I really don't understand why Tashi and Custom Knife Factory didn't really issue the knife with any option for that. I think it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to go through all that effort with all the milling and create this really unique and interesting looking product and then sell it in a variant that doesn't show off all that hard work. So I think this knife is super cool. You can see here on the lock side that we still have the same patterns kind of going on. They are broken up a little bit differently because of the lock bar, and then you have the clip going on as well. So I also like that, they carry the mill pattern on the clip through to whatever's behind it on the knife. So you can kind of see here, you have the horizontal dashes that continue to match the horizontal dashes on this piece below. And then you have the diagonal dashes through on top of the diagonal dashes on this section. And then you even have this solid area that kind of matches up to the, sectioning on the knife as well. So a lot of intricacies here, a lot of detail work, and I just think it's really awesome that you're able to explore that more on the colored version. Now, this particular knife is number 150. Pretty hard to see there, pretty faded away. And we are told that this knife is fairly rare by Custom Knife Factory. Now, it's no secret that the knife is completely huge. We obviously saw that when we looked at the PM2 comparison. And it makes it a little bit unwieldy to carry, and it's maybe not the best thing to have along with you if you are really going almost literally anywhere. So if we take a look at the action on this knife, it's pretty robust, it's pretty monstrous, but I have to say it's very difficult to get this knife to break the detent unless you are hitting the flipper tab in the exact right way. So what we have here is one of those flipper tab designs that's kind of this really steep angle. It's kind of like right on the line with the pivot. And this is a similar design to like what we're seeing on the Riate Future and the Max Ace Cicada. This one's a little bit more rounded off than the other two that I just mentioned, but of course you are not finding any jimping. And what that means is that if you have pressure on the lock bar, the detent's too strong. I can't open the knife. I'm trying to open the knife right now, and it doesn't want to pop. And that's because I'm putting all this pressure right onto the lock bar. So if I kind of ease off the lock bar here with my middle finger, it's still troublesome if you're just pulling down. So basically what I'm doing right now is I'm pulling at kind of this angle. And that's like not really enough to break the detent. And so what I end up having to do to really get continuous operation out of this knife is kind of take my finger further up, and I'm putting the tip of the tab in kind of this crux of my finger, and then I'm using like basically the whole weight of my finger to pull down. And I'm basically hooking around this edge, and then what that's doing is actually giving me more of a push button action, because the way that that's applying force right here, if I pull down, even if I pull this way, what's actually happening is there's pressure being put in here. And so you're actually getting this angle of pressure when you wrap your finger around, and that's what's getting the deployment. So it really is this angle of pressure that you need to break the detent. This kind of light switch pressure is not going to work. Just pulling down, I got it that time, but it's much more helpful to kind of get the meatiness of your finger around the tab, and then just really push the whole mass of your finger like in towards the knife, and then that gives you pretty solid deployment pretty frequently. Now, it is still difficult if you're putting pressure on the lock bar, and a bit of a wrist flick doesn't hurt either, just because it's tough, man, just because that detent's really strong. Now, the good news is the reason that the detent is so strong is because you can see you have this super thick blade stock, you have this crazy large, super meaty blade, and basically the only way to get a really great action, a really great deployment out of a blade this big is to have such a strong detent. So I can kind of understand that. Now, if you take a look at like the Thorburn L36M, this has a super strong detent too and a fairly big blade as well. Not nearly the size of the Muscle, of course. But what I found that helped them was having this kind of extended flipper tab. It's out a little bit further, so it just allows you to get more leverage, and you can break that really strong detent with a little bit more leverage. The same thing is true on like the HEA Designs Equilibrium. This flipper tab, you can see, sticks out pretty far, but it gives me really good leverage. And so even though the D10 is really strong on this knife, to where if I kind of fat finger this and try to pull down, I'm on the lock bar, I really struggle. It's really hard. But if I just get the tip here, take advantage of that leverage, it's super smooth, super easy. So that's kind of what's going on here, is you have this super heavy blade, and it's difficult to get that leverage with such a tiny and sort of unhelpfully shaped flipper tab. So once you get that going, though, it's a super meaty deployment. I mean, it completely rockets out. It's super smooth. It's on ceramic caged bearings. And this thing, it wants to attack the senses of people around you. It's super loud when it opens up. There's no way to be discreet with this knife, visually or audibly. And really, if you're going to own it and you're going to carry it, that's great. I carried it to work. Everybody at work kind of knows my deal, and so it's not as scary to them because they get it. I have different knives on me all the time. But if you're in a less friendly environment, or one where people aren't quite as aware of what you have going on, this knife is probably not the best choice unless you want to completely freak somebody out. Now, I will say the knife drops shut very smoothly under its own weight, as it should with a blade that weighs this much. I would have been thoroughly upset if the knife didn't drop shut under its own weight with a blade like this, because this blade stock is ridiculously thick. So yeah, it's got a really smooth action once you get your habits down with being able to open it and making sure you're not pushing a bunch of pressure into the detent. You can see we do have the bronzed pivot as well on this one because it was customized. One thing I will say that I like about the knife is that the back spacer, the back bar, really takes up the full length of the knife, meaning that even though you have this sharp giant blade that's probably resting kind of right in here, you're not going to slice your finger on it through the back of the knife or down here at the tip. They do have the backspacer wrapping up all the way around, and so you're completely protected, and I really like that. If you have seen some of my other videos, you've seen me complain about knives like the Persian Mako, for example, and this has a really sharp point right here, and you know, you're able to injure yourself on that fairly easily. The next thing I want to talk about on this one is the clip. So you can see here, the clip is, it doesn't have a whole lot of room in there. Now, I find that interesting because you have such a large and robust knife that, you know, it really suggests that you are probably going to be putting this around some pretty heavy-duty jeans if you're going to be carrying something like this. And this doesn't really leave room for that. Now, I wear slacks, and I carried this knife, and even though it weighed down my pocket a fair amount, you know, it fit over that fine. And so I think for the most part, you're going to be okay. But if you are wearing super thick, heavy-duty jeans, you might, I mean, whatever. You'll still be able to get the clip around, but it's just going to be, you know, it's going to be sitting like this. And I don't know if I want to, like, constantly be putting that much negative tension on my clip. But it does slide in and out very well. It has this really elongated ramp. And so it doesn't have too much crazy tension. You can see I don't have much trouble even just with the nail of my thumb moving that around. So surprisingly, the clip actually functions super well. The last thing I want to talk about on this knife before I let you guys go is the ergonomics. So you can see I get 2 fingers in here fairly well. Then the rest of my hand wraps around here. This kind of tapers off along this this crux in my hand, which I always like. And it actually has some of the best ergonomics of any knife I've ever held, to be perfectly honest. You get really good even grip all the way around with your fingers, your thumb, I have smaller hands and it's a big knife, but if you had bigger hands, your thumb is going to fit perfectly into this little area here on the back of the blade. In fact, there's a rather large area from about here to here where you can kind of rest your thumb comfortably. So I can keep it all the way back here, and I feel pretty good to kind of wave this around. And then if I want to choke up a little bit, I can, and I can get a little bit finer there, even if it is a fairly large blade. So I have to say that even though it is a gigantic knife, they've made it to be held and they've made it to be used. And I can really appreciate that this knife feels just as comfortable and confidence inspiring to hold as a much smaller knife does. So I really got to say they knocked it out of the park with the ergonomics on such a large knife. Typically when you get into the bigger knives, I mean, even if you look at the Bodega, comparatively in size, the Bodega is like significantly smaller in really every dimension, which is crazy to me. But you know, you hold the Bodega and it's got great ergonomics as well, but it almost feels bigger in my hand than the Muscle does, even though the Muscle's so much bigger. And that's just thanks to, mainly in part to this cutout here, but it just has fantastic ergonomics. There isn't much to say about the blade, guys, other than, right, like it's got this super high flat grind. And it's got a little bit of a recurve here, but nothing too crazy. Then you have a large section of belly, and it's super useful, right? It's got a stonewash finish. You could beat the crap out of this. It's a little bit thick to maybe slice your tomatoes at lunch, but you're gonna get through like an apple and everything else like that perfectly fine with this knife. So despite its size, this thing's actually a remarkably good knife. And even though it's something that I'm not gonna hold on to, I kind of have to recommend it. If you have an opportunity to pick one up that has some of this customization going on, something a little bit more exciting than just that plain tie, then I definitely recommend going for it. If you guys would like to see videos with other knives that you see here, please remember to subscribe. If you like this video, please hit that like button. It definitely helps me to know what videos you guys appreciate versus what videos you don't. Follow me on Instagram at tovarishworks. If you'd like to send me in a knife for lovely loners like this sweet Ferrum Forge Gavco Mako, you can do so by emailing me at tovarishworks@gmail.com. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.